All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors this morning. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. To thank Stephen Terry Zinn for dedicating all of his shurim and drushos this month in honor of their newest grandson, Matan Shmuel Aaron. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, this young man grows to be an incredible Ben Torah. Amen ve'esem shanim tovos. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Haley and Ari Lichterman, in memory of Haley's mother, Rachel Leah Bas Ruvain Meir Zichron Levracha. May all of our learning provide an aliyah for her neshama and a nechama for her family. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Michael and Rachel Leibowitz, for dedicating the Shir Le'ili Nishmas, Michael's mother, Rus Bas Harav Avi Ezri Avram. Zichron Levracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. With that, let us begin. We have an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chav Ches 28. We left off yesterday. We almost finished the Mishnah. We left off at the last Bo Bayom, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom, right at the 2 dots. Bo Bayom. On that day. So remember again, as we discussed in yesterday's Mishnah, or in yesterday's Shir, same Mishnah, right? Ultimately, again, Bo Bayom refers to that day when there was a dramatic change in leadership between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The doors of the Beis Medrash were thrown wide open, and there was just an incredible proliferation of Torah study. And again, what was incredible is apparently both people who were in the Beis Medrash previously, as well as those who were barred previously, everyone experienced an incredible hisorarus. Actually, Moshe Abramson pointed this out to me at the end of yesterday, after Shir yesterday, that Rabbi Akiva is quoted as coming up with some of these additional drushas. Now, Bepashtos, Rabbi Akiva was inside the Beis Medrash, right? He was allowed in even under Rabbi Gamliel's rule. But interestingly enough, despite that, even Rabbi Akiva experiences an aliyah in his learning when the masses and the throngs of people come in. See, it's not just those who are barred entry who maybe suffered a little bit in their learning, but again, also we all know this. When do we learn better? I learn better when there's a chevra, right? I learn better when there's a group. I learn better when I'm surrounded by my chaverim, whether they're good learners as I am, better learners than I am. Lamaisa, there is a certain shefa, there's a certain bracha that comes about when Klal Yisrael is together in the Beis Medrash. In any event, so the Mishnah goes on. On that day, Rabbi Yeshua ben Horkanus darshan the following: Lo avad Eov HaSekadosh Baruch Hu ela me'ava. Eov only served Hashem from out of love. Shene Emar Hein Yiktaleni Lo Ayachel. So we'll say, so the pasuk literally again that they're quoting over here is the pasuk, of course, from Eov. And the pasuk reads, well, the way we're going to read it right now is, Hein Yiktaleni, even had HaKadosh Baruch Hu taken my life, lo, for him Ayachel, I would yearn. For him I would yearn. V'adayna davar shakolo. But still, when you read this pasuk, it's still not clear. Ani mitzapeh or eini mitzapeh. Now I will say, here's what's interesting. So the lashon is Hein Yiktaleni. Even if HaKadosh Baruch Hu were to take my life, lo ayachal. Now lo is spelled lamed vav, but again it's vocalized the same way. That's what the lamed aleph, which is no. So what is Eov saying? Is Eov saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if you were to take my life, I would wait for you, I would yearn for you, or I wouldn't yearn for you? Talmud Lomar, ad egva lo asar tumasi mimeni. Melamed. So therefore, again, the next pasuk says, until I die, my yearning for you will never expire. Melamed shemi ava asa is to teach us ultimately again that when Eov served HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eov served out of love. Amar Yeshua said, Mi yegala afar me'enech Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if only the dust were removed from your eyes, meaning if only you could come back from the dead, if only you could see what's happening over here. Shahayisa dorish kol yamecha shalo avad Eov es hamakom elamira. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, you used to teach all of the time that Klal Yisrael only served. That Eov only served HaKadosh Baruch Hu from yira, from fear, from reverence. Shneimar ish tam v'yasher yirei Elokim v'sar meira. V'halo Yoshua Talmidecha b'yet Yoshua, Rabbi, right? But yet ultimately again, but Yoshua, the Talmud of your Talmud, just learned Lamed Shemi Ava Asa. Ultimately, just learned that in fact Eov did not serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of fear, but rather Eov served HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of love. So I will say, so incredible again, but we'll discuss obviously each of these things in greater depth. But first of all, just an incredible insight, an incredible window into that day, that Bo Bayom, when Torah so dramatically changed for all of Klal Yisrael. Simply give people the opportunity. I will say, the Musar Haskell is, sometimes in life, all you have to do is open the door for other people and they will accomplish great things. Open the door, make them feel welcome, put out the benches, roll out the red carpet, and people will show you their ability to accomplish magnificent things. Good. Back to the Gemara. So Leman. So also remember again, let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. So this was a long, this is a one daf Mishnah. One that's a long one. So now listen to this. Remember, how did all of this start? So all of this started because the Mishnah said that the same way that the waters check her, the waters check him. The waters check him. So let's say, remember again, so the Gemara says, so Leman. Who's the him? Who's the him that we're talking about? Ilim Labal. If we say that when the waters check her, so the waters check the husband, to make sure that he is free of sin as well, so Baal my Ovid. But 1 second, to be fair, the husband didn't do anything over here. Right, it's not the husband. Maybe the husband is not the best guy for doing this to his wife, right? But lamaisa, he didn't commit an avera. So v'chi tema, perhaps you'll say top of chavches di ispe avon badki leimaya. So we'll say, so maybe you'll say lamaisa. Well, maybe it's saying like this: the husband is accusing his wife of immorality. So maybe what the waters do is the same way the waters check her for immorality, the waters check him for immorality. In other words, right? What's the expression? People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, right? So person's going to bring his wife to this process, and again, subject her to the Sotah process, which I'm going to both say, no matter how you slice it, right? It's a degrading and humiliating process. And by the way, just as what have we learned? What have we learned throughout this Gemara? It's designed that way. In other words, it's designed that way. The process is debasing and humiliating because, again, the goal is that no one should ever have to experience it. That's the goal. That's the goal. So maybe you'll say, Lamaisa, same way the waters check her for immorality, the waters will check him as well. Well, 1 second, you already learned what I'll say. If the husband himself is an immoral individual, the waters don't work. The waters don't work on her. We learned this, we'll say, Vahatanya, we learned. Vahatanya, we've actually seen a reference, we'll see it again later on. V'nika ha'ishmi avon. Ultimately, again, the man is cleansed from sin. Va'isha hahi tisa es avona. And the woman, ultimately, again, will bear her sin. So Rabbi said there is a direct correlation and relationship between the husband's personal piety and the wife's culpability to teach us. Bizman sha'ish menuka me'avon, hamayin bod kines ishto. When the man himself is free of sin, Rabbi said, when we say free of sin, just to be clear now, we're going to clarify this. Because, for example, if you look at Rashi understands over here that being free of sin, he says, Shalo ba'aleha, top Rashi, Bizman sha'isha menuka me'avon, sha'ish me'avon, Shalo ba'aleha mishenesra alav, ha'isha yitzah savana. So Rashi understands it in a very specific way, talking about that he did not have relations with his wife since she became a Sotah. But we'll actually see that we could broaden this a little bit more to actually focus on some other pieces as well. So we'll say, but the idea being that Allah, in order for the waters to work on the woman, the husband himself has to be in a state of piety. Personal piety. Can't mean free of any sin, because no one is free of every single sin. So the Gemara says, when the man is free of sin, so ultimately the water checks his wife. So bisman, I'm sorry, if the man, however, is not free of sin, ultimately again, so the waters will not check his wife. So therefore, I will say, let's take a step back. So therefore, the oso in the Mishnah can't really refer to the husband, right? Because again, if the husband himself has some degree of liability or culpability, the waters don't work on her. The waters simply don't work on her. In other words, in order for the waters to work on her, he himself has to be in a state of piety, which I will say is also an incredible yisod, which is in life, whatever standard you're going to, we've spoken about this before, the best approach is don't expect anything of anyone. Right? Don't really, just don't live your life with expectations of other people. That's the best way. But if you're going to have expectations of other people, whatever you expect of someone else, make sure that what? You hold yourself to that very same expectation, right? And that's the Musar Haskell over here. Husband, you're going to bring your wife ultimately again to Beis Din and subject her to this process ultimately again because she's acting immorally. That's fine. Just make sure that you hold yourself to the same standard of morality that you're holding someone else. I'll say it's an incredible yisod because so often in life, whether I realize it or not, we hold other people like to the highest standard, but yet we're so willing to give ourselves a pass on so many different things. So of course, the lachatchila in life is don't expect things from people. Best thing in the world. Don't expect things from people. Then when they do something, it's fantastic. But don't live your life expecting things. But if you are going to have expectations and hold people to standards, make sure you hold yourself to the very same ones. So therefore, it must be that ultimately, again, it's to the boel. That the oso in the Mishnah is talking about the adulterer. That the same way that the waters go ahead and check her, the waters check him being the suspected adulterer. So if that's the case, we'll say, so then why doesn't the Mishnah write it symmetrically? Listen, Kidiktani Seifa. We'll say, what does it say at the end of the Mishnah? Kishem shasur lebal, kach asur leboel. The end of the Mishnah says the same way that this woman, if she is guilty, is asura to her husband, she is also asura to the adulterer. Now, both say at the end of the Mishnah explicitly says boel. So if that's the case, why not say in the beginning of the Mishnah, Kishem shamayim bodkin osa, kachamayim bodkin es haboel. In other words, why not just be explicit and articulate what you really mean instead of saying oso, which by definition is an ambiguous term. Liolam laboel. Sigmar says, you're right, but still, oso is referring to the adulterer. And what the Mishnah is saying is the same way that the waters ultimately check her, so the waters check him, the adulterer, as well. Bereisha, Aidi detana osa, tani oso. Seifa, Aidi detani baal, tani boal. Tana boal. So once I say the Gemara essentially answers, it's just a question of textual symmetry. Since ultimately, again, the beginning of the Mishnah, since the beginning of the Mishnah says osa, kashem shamayim bodkin osa, so therefore again symmetrically it says oso. And the Mishnah says, or Sefer the Mishnah says, the same way that she is asura to the Baal, she's also asura to the Boel. Good. So we'll say, but bottom line for our purposes is first halacha in the Mishnah is the same way that the waters check the woman, they also check the suspected adulterer. And I will say that is how the Rambam paskins, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Now, there are things, we'll get into this more, there are things where if the husband engages in certain behaviors, ultimately it prevents the waters from taking effect. So Rashi already pointed out over here that, for example, if he has relations with her after she is a Sotah, remember again, both say, it's interesting, at what point is she a Sotah? So after stira, right? In other words, the moment she violates the warning and ultimately, again, is alone with a particular man for the amount of the particular man about whom she was warned about, for a particular amount of time in which something could have occurred, she becomes a Sotah. So the mice, again, now at that point, she is asura to him until she drinks the waters, which then clarify her guilt or innocence. It is asur for him, husband, to have relations with her after she has become a Sotah, before her innocence or guilt is proven. If he does, the whole process is done, right? At that point in time, there's no Sotah process. The waters will not work. The waters will not work. Now, what we will discuss a little bit later on in Mem Zayin is whether or not other forms of husband's sinful behavior could shut down the water as well. So that we'll discuss. But Lamaisa, for our purposes today, what the Mishnah teaches us is the same way that the waters check her, the waters check the adulterer as well. Next, Ibailu. Bo ka'amar. Now remember again, what was the drasha? So now we said the halacha. What was the drasha? The drasha was, back in the Mishnah, Shnemar, ubo, right? It uses the lashon of ubo twice. Well, we'll see actually what the drasha is. But it says ubo, the waters will come into her twice. Why twice? So we're darshaning one for her, one for the boel, right? She drinks it, one, right? So the water has an impact on her, the water has an impact on the adulterer. So the Gemara says as follows, Ibailu, bo ka'amar, ubo ka'amar. Both say this is actually interesting. What's the drasha? What's the drasha? Right? Is the drasha that it says bo is the drasha the extra vav? Is that what we're dashing over here? Tomorrow say it could have just said bo without the vav. So the extra vav is the source of the drasha, which tells me that the waters check the husband as well. Or ubo kama, or is it just a double lashon of bo? In other words, we're going to see it's a nuanced question. Are we dashing the vav? Or we're darshaning the word. So the Gemara says Tashma. So let's analyze this. Kishem, you'll see why this makes a difference in just a moment. Kishem shasur lebal kach asur leboel. The same way that she is asura to the husband, she is also asura to the adulterer. Kishene'emar nitma'a v'nitma'a. The pasuk says nitma v'nitma, nitma twice. V'adayin tiboy. I will say now again, you still have the same question. Nitma'a ka'amar. O nitma'a v'nitma'a ka'amar. So we are left with the same question. Are we darshaning a double expression, or are we darshaning a vav? Right, darshaning a vav. So say this is actually one of these situations where everyone is agreeing on the result of the drasha. Right, there's no machlokes about the halacha. Not machlokes. The question is, how are we arriving at that? What are the mechanics of the drasha? So Tashma, let's analyze. Midiktani seifa. Look at the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Omer. Shnei pamim ha'amurim beparsha v'nitma'a. It says 2 times in the parasha v'nitma'a. She'll be right. She became the echel habal ve'echel haboel. Right. One v'nitma teaches me that she is asura to the husband, and the other v'nitma teaches me that she is asura to the adulterer. So the Gemara says michlal. I will say the fact that Rebbe has his drasha of v'nitma, and Rebbe says explicitly because it says the word twice. What could we infer from that? Michlal de Rabbi Akiva vavi kadarish. It sounds like Rabbi say that according to Rabbi Akiva is not really darshaning the double expressions, but rather Rabbi Akiva is darshaning are the vavs. Right? Remember again, a vav is often extra, but vav is often used as a ribui, as a way to include something else. So if Rabbi is darshaning the double expressions, Rabbi Akiva must be darshaning the vavs. Hilchach, Rabbi say this is actually very interesting. Hilchach, Rabbi Akiva, Shisa Kroi Ksivi. So we'll say, now watch this. It's actually fascinating. So according to Rabbi Akiva, therefore, we'll say, it turns out that you actually have 6 words to darshan. Now we'll say, why? Well, we'll see what this means. Rabbi Akiva darshans vav. So we'll say, if you look, you see Rashi, Shisa Kroi. See that Rashi, right-hand column, at least in my version, it's right across from the Hagos Habach. I don't know if it's like that in your Gemara as well. She's a Rabbi say, watch this. She's a cry, Shlosha uba'u ksuvim sham. Rabbi say the Torah records the word uba'u 3 times in the section of Sotah. And I remember again, Rabbi say, so according to Rabbi Akiva, a vav is something you darshan. If you have 3 uba'us, Rabbi say, what does that give you? That gives you 6 drasha items. Why 6? Why 6? 3 ba'us, right? And what? 3 vavs. 3 vavs. So according to Rabbi Akiva, from 3 uba'us, you actually have 6 drashas you can make. Watch this. Back to the Gemara for just a moment. Rabbi Akiva, Shisa Kraik Sivi, Chalet Sava Dida, the Chalet Sava Dide. So I will say, actually, take a look at Rashi. Let's look at this first in Rashi, then I'll read in the Gemara, because it's important Rashi. Shisa Kraik, Shlosha Bog Suvim Sham. It says the word uba'u 3 times. Uba'am Haim Hama Arima Ha'ela B'me'echa, Litzbos Balten, Lo Dia Lanu, Tibeten, v'hadar yerech shelo lahotzi lazkidar minon v'chad v'ishkas ha'isha esmei amarim uba amayim. So we'll say, now watch this. So why do you have three ubos? So number one ubo is litzava. I'm reading this first in Rashi. Sava is Shakadosh Baruch Hu goes to shiyavu bahamayim lemarim. So we'll say one is where Hakadosh Baruch Hu kiviyachol commands that the waters are going to work. Right? The second, ba'u la'asiyah, is to tell you ultimately, again, the process, ultimately for Sotah, v'hishkes hamayim v'haisem nitma la'asiyah, kan hodia, hakasav as Yisrael demaftiach le'en shiv dikenu. The third ubo is to ultimately inform Klal Yisrael, ultimately, again, that the waters are going to work in a particular way. So I'll say, so three words, sava, ultimately, again, is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands, so to speak, that the waters work in a particular way. Asiyah, the process, and Hodia is ultimately where Klal Yisrael is informed about how things are going to unfold. So back to the Gemara. So Rabbi Akiva therefore has six drashas he can make. Here we go. Chad, litzava dida, v'chal litzava didei. So I will say one is the tzava, that ultimately, again, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands that the waters will enter. One is for her, right, the Isha Sotah, and one is for him. The him being the Boel, the adulterer. Next, chad la'asiyah dida, v'chad la'asiyah didei. One bow is to teach me the asiyah, the process for her, and one is the process for him. And last, the chad liyadiyah dida, the chad liyadiyah didei. And one ultimately, again, is the hodah, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises that the waters are going to work in a particular way. One is for her, one is for him. Okay, so this is the drasha of Rabbi Akiva, six drashas. So we'll say, in essence, it's three drashas, but again, each drasha has a track for her and a track for him. Incredible. For Rebbe, tzlasa kraik sivid. And I will say, Rebbe doesn't darshan vav. So according to Rebbe, you don't have six drashas. What do you have? Three. Why three? Three ubos. He doesn't darshan the vav. But Rebbe, tzlasa kraik sivi. Chalet sava. The Chalasia, the Chalidia. I will say now, remember, it's the same three drashas, just Rebbe doesn't have the three tracks, right? Or I should say the two tracks for each drasha. So one is to teach me ultimately, again, one is the tzava, because Baruch Hu commanded that the water is going to enter her and work a certain way. Second is Asiyah, the actual process itself. And Hodah, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Klal Yisrael how things are going to work. Rebbe, Kishem Shamayim Bot Ginosa, Kach Bot Ginosa Minale. So I'll say, here's the problem. According to Rabbi Akiva, the extra vav by each word allows me to darshan each stage of the process for her and for him. But Rebbe, who doesn't darshan vav, he only has three words to darshan: bo. And again, for the three processes for her, from where does Rebbe know that the same process works for him? Where does he know that? So Manale, nafkale midisanya. Ultimately, again, he learns out from the following: litzpos baten v'lan pil yarech. So I'll say the pasuk says ultimately litzpos baten. Literally, again, the stomach will swell and the thigh will fall, distend. Right. So the Gemara says fall. So the Gemara says, what does this refer to? Bitno v'yirecha shal boel. Wow, fascinating. This actually refers to the stomach and the thigh of the adulterer. Telling us Osai that not only does the adulterer share in the fate of the Isha Sotah, but what? It's the same fate. In other words, it's the same punishment. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Ata omer bitna v'irecha shel boel, o eno ela bitna v'irecha shel niv eles. I don't understand. Why would you darshan this as referring to the stomach and the thigh of the adulterer? Doesn't it make sense that it's talking about her, the adulteress, the woman? Kishu omer b'tzav sabitna v'nafla yirecha. Then I will say, because there's another pasuk. The pasuk says, her stomach will swell and her thigh will fall. So I will say, that's already stated beforehand. Hari bitna v'yirecha shal neveles. So we've already spoken about her once already. So the Gemara says, Umani makayim litzos baten v'lan pil yarech. So we'll say, why would it have to say the second time? Why would it have to say ultimately? I will say, and by the way, if you notice, it's also interesting because the first time it's written in the feminine. V'tzivsa bitna v'nafla yirecha. So that refers to her. Why does it have to say the second time? And this time it doesn't phrase it in the feminine. Umani makayim litzos baten v'lan pil yarech. Bitno v'yirecho shel boel. This refers ultimately again to the stomach and the thigh ultimately of the boel, of the adulterer. So I'll say, so again, I just want to clarify something. Remember, there's no machlokes in halacha over here, right? Remember, again, this is one of these nice gemaras where everyone is agreeing, right? Everyone is agreeing. Remember, we've already established Kishem Shamayim Botkin Oso, Kach Hamayim Botkin Oso. Right? The same way that the waters check her, the waters check him. We've established who's the him. Who's the him? The him is the Boel. The him is the adulterer. So that we've already established. Now we're just trying to, now, according to Rabbi Akiva Darshan's Vav, Rabbi Akiva's got it made, right? It lines up so beautifully. 6 drushas, 3 ubaos for each part of the process. The extra Vav allows you to darshan it again for whatever applies to her, ultimately again applies to him. Rebbe, however, doesn't darshan Vavs. Where does he learn it out from? So now we've established, he learns it out from the phrase, Lan Pil Yarech, excuse me, Litzbos Batan Valan Pil Yarech. Right, so again, so now everybody's on the same page, just different drushes. The Idach, Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, what does he do with the phrase Litzbos Batan Valan Pil Yarech? Right, remember, Rabbi Akiva does not need that drasha to teach me that the process applies to the boel, right? Why? Because unless he dashed in the vavs. So what does he need that phrase for? The model kohen, the beten beresha, v'hadar yarech, shalahotzi laz amayim amarim. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Akiva, that second pasuk, that second phrase of latzbos batan v'lam pil yarech is actually a phrase that teaches me the Kohen explicitly explains to the woman the process of the Mei Sotah and tells her exactly how the waters are going to work. They're going to first affect your stomach, then they're going to affect your thigh. In order that she should understand the process, and she should understand how the Mei Sotah will work. Incredible. V'idach, according to Rebbe, so why doesn't he dash in the pasuk that way? Imkein lichtov kra bitna virecha. If that's the case, again, let the pasuk be phrased as her stomach, her thigh. My batan v'yerech. So why does it just say thigh and stomach and thigh? Shmamin ala boil. Therefore, again, it's clear that it's talking about the adulterer, not talking about her. I ve'ema kulei lahachi huda asa. So Rabbi say, why don't we say that the entire pasuk comes to teach me that the boel is included ultimately again in the punishment? Imkain lichtov bitno v'yirecho. If that's the case, Rabbi say, then it should have phrased it in the masculine possessive. His stomach, his thigh. Why does it just say batan v'yarech shmamina tarti? Ultimately, Rabbi say, because the pasuk is actually teaching me 2 things. What are the 2 things I'm being taught from in the pasuk? Rabbi say, number one is teaching me that the same way that the waters impact her, the waters impact him. Number 2, what does it teach me? That ultimately, again, there's a seder ha'onesh. There is a seder in the way that the waters impact her. First, they impact the stomach, then they impact the thigh. So therefore, I will say again, so it's that duality in the pasuk. That's why it's phrased as batan and yerech as opposed to bitno and yirecho. So I will say, so halacha l'maisa, what comes out over here is, like I said, everyone's agreeing that, sorry. Everyone is agreeing that the same way that the waters impact her, the waters impact him. The only machlokes ultimately is in the nature of the drasha that allows us to get to this result. Good. Tarabaram. So we'll say, I'm sorry, I'm Rabbi Shmuel. Kach Eudorish Zechariah. Tarabaram. Shalosh Pamim Hamurim Beparsha. In nitma'a, v'nitma'a. So we'll say, so the pasuk, right, 3 times in the parish of Sotah, Torah uses lashon of nitma'a. She becomes defiled, right? So why do I need these 3 lashonos, right? Nitma, v'nitma, lama, echel bal, ve'echel boel, ve'echel truma. So we'll say very interesting. 1 is the teaching that she is asura to the husband. 2nd is the teaching that she is asura ultimately to the adulterer. And 3rd is the teaching that she is asura to truma. Now I will say, now what this would be referring to if she is the wife of a Kohen or the daughter of a Kohen. Now look at Rashi for just a moment because it's very important. Ve'echel truma. Shafilu hi bas Kohen, ubayla Kohen, nifsal min truma. Now I will say, I want to point something out. When is she asura to truma? Right? When is she asura for truma? When does this isser begin? Remember, this isser is immediately upon becoming a sotah. Right, so remember again, the moment she violates the warning and she is secluded with the man about whom she was warned about, for the amount of time in which something could have happened, she becomes a sotah. That's it, right then and there, she's a sotah, and in that moment, she's asura b'truma. I will say, obviously, if she drinks the water, right, and she begins to degrade, so Lamai saying, of course she has rubbish because she's an adulteress, right? And if she comes out innocent, she's mutaras b'truma. So what we're talking about over here is from the moment that she becomes a sotah, she violated the warning, she's in a state of suffix, right? We don't know. Did she commit adultery? Did she not commit adultery? She is asura to consume truma from that moment until the waters go ahead and give us clarity. Incredible. So the Gemara says, good. Dear Rabbi Akiva, this was Rabbi Akiva. I'm Rabbi Shmuel. Kal v'chomer. It's true. It's kal v'chomer. It's kal v'chomer. Uma grusha shemuteres letruma asur lekahuna. So a grusha ultimately again. We'll say now a grusha is muteres for truma. Now what does it mean a grusha is muteres for truma? Here's the case. If you have a bas kohen who married a Yisrael and now she gets divorced from her husband, assuming that what? There are no children. Halacha l'maisa says she can go back to her father's home and she could go ahead and eat truma. So that's a grusha. That's a grusha. Ultimately, again, it was permitted in truma. Say thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so sorry to bother you. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam shakol niyeh b'dvaro. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the Gemara says as follows. So this kavachomer, it's the kavachomer. Uma grusha shemutaris l'truma asur lekahuna. So a grusha ultimately again, who is permitted to eat truma, right? She's permitted to eat truma after her divorce, return to her father's home. Yet she is asur to the kahuna. Zu shasur b'truma eno din shasur lekahuna. This woman, this sotah, who is asur to truma, certainly can't marry into the kahuna. Now, I both say the Gemara on the bottom of Amud Beis is going to try to understand what is this. Right? Rabbi Akiva is not talking about this. Rabbi Shmuel is responding to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is talking about the fact that a sotah is asuratit truma, and Rabbi Shmuel brings a kavachomer that says that ultimately a sotah can't marry into the kahuna. So the Gemara is going to ask, what are you talking about? But let's shelve that for now. So Rabbi says, I'm sorry. What does the pasuk mean when it says she was defiled and she wasn't defiled? Im nitma, if she's tameh, right? If she did commit adultery, then lama shosa, then why should she drink? I was going to say, if we know the woman committed adultery, there's no drinking of sotah water. Im lo nitma, if she did not commit adultery, lama mashka, then why would you give it a drink? The Greek is say, magilacha akasov shasafek asura. Rabbi say, this is incredible. What the Torah is trying to convey to us, Rabbi say, is what is the status of a sotah? Remember again, Rabbi say, I want to be clear. When we talk about a sotah is a woman who has violated the warning given to her by her husband. What is her status? Her status, Rabbi say, is safek. But yet we see, how do we deal with her safek? Asura. As Rabbi say, essentially, the sotah is treated as an adulteress until proven innocent. Right? That from a halachic perspective, obviously, we're not doing anything to her. The waters are going to figure out her guilt or innocence. But Lamaisa, from a status perspective, we look at her as asura. Shasafek asura. So the way we look at her now, in this moment after she violated the warning, is she is asura. And I will say this actually yields a very interesting halachic conclusion. Mikan atadan l'sheretz. So I will say it's actually interesting. From here, you could actually learn out the sheretz. I will say sheretz is the tumah associated again with creepy, crawly things. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Uma sotah shelo asaba shogeg k'mezid va'onis kiratzon. So also when it comes to sotah, shogeg is not like mezid, right? And ones is not like rason. Meaning what Rabbi was saying, if a woman was violated or coerced, right, or was a shogeg, right, lamaisa, that's not sotah. That's not sotah. Sotah is only chayeves if she's intentional. Yet asaba safek kivadai. Yet Rabbi will say, interestingly enough, once she is a sotah, she's still in a state of safek until the waters clarify what her status is. But yet halachically we treat her as vadai. V'haraya, she's not allowed to eat truma. Sheretz sha'asa bo shogeg kemezid. Va'onis karatzon. When it comes to tumas sheretz, when it comes to tumas sheretz, doesn't matter if you contact the sheretz, you come in contact with the sheretz, right? B'shogeg or b'mezid va'onis ubaratzon. Does that matter? Does that matter? No. In other words, if you touch the sheretz, you're tamei. Yet we'll say eino din sheyasebo safek kevadai. Certainly, again, when it comes to tumas sheretz, then ultimately, again, safek is treated like vadayeza. So we'll say you hear the kavachomer. The kavachomer is like this. When it comes to Sotah, so shogeg is not like mezid, ones is not like ratz. In other words, by Sotah, there is only a chiyuv. If halacha l'maisa, it's intentional. Yet, even by Sotah, where shogeg is not kamezid, ones is not karatzon. Yet what? Safek is treated like vada. Again, I will say, just to be clear, what does it mean that by Sotah, safek is treated kivada? What does it mean? That means is from the moment she becomes a Sotah, i.e., she violated the warning, she was alone with this man, we treat her, here's what's interesting, to say a little bit differently, by Sotah, it's almost as if you're guilty until proven innocent. You're guilty, in other words, status-wise, you're guilty until proven innocent, which makes sense, because Lamai says what we call in halacha raglaim l'davar. There is strong circumstantial evidence that something has gone down over. So from a status perspective, you are now guilty. The way Rabbi Akiva is saying that manifests itself is that if she is the wife of a Kohen, she can't eat truma. So therefore, again, by sheretz, where ones is kiratz, it doesn't matter how you contract tumas sheretz. Was it an accident? It wasn't an accident. Again, still not a right. Somebody shoved the sheretz in your mouth, whatever, or not into your mouth, right? Into your hand, right? L'mais again, that's ones. You're still chayiv, or not chayiv. You're still tamei. Certainly, again, we would make safek kivadai. We would make it. So say, therefore, what that would mean is, if you're not sure if you came in contact with the sheretz or not, what should be the halacha? You should be tamei. Because ultimately, again, safek is like vadai. Good. Top of Chaf Chesam base 28b, first line. Makom Shabbos. They will say, remember, whenever you make a kavachomer, it's interestingly enough, what you can always do, I will say, is kavachomer could work both ways. Makom Shabbos is you're learning out sheretz from Sotah, so I can make it, so we could reverse it also. Makom Shabbos, mas Sotah. So first I'll take a look at Rashi. O Makom Shabbos, hoil velo lamarata, dematminon misafek ela misota, choser vedun. All right, so back to the Gemara's reading side first. Makom Shabbos, mas Sotah rishos hayachid, af sheretz rishos hayachid. I will say, so let's analyze a bit more. Just like Sotah, where does Sotah apply? Sotah only applies in Rosh Hashanah. What does it mean Sotah only applies in Rosh Hashanah? The only way to become a Sotah is how? Stira. Stira has to occur where? In Rosh Hashanah. As I will say, if a woman is in proximity, right? Let's say Reuven warns Rachel not to be alone with Shimon. Right? And Reuven and Rachel stands with Shimon for 2 hours in Rosh Hashanah. Is she a Sotah? No. In other words, she's only a Sotah if it's Rosh Hashanah, if they're secluded. Sumas Sotah Rosh Hashanah, just like Sotah ultimately again only occurs in Rosh Hashanah. Av sheretz Rosh Hashanah. Sotah Rabbi said when we speak about that a safek sheretz is tamei, when is a safek sheretz tamei? Rabbi say when only in Rosh Hashanah. Only if the safek arose in Rosh Hashanah. Now take a look at that Rashi. Umakum Shabbos, horil v'lo lamarata dematminon misafek ela misota chazer v'dun. Go back and judge. Demas Sotah hadit tmei misafek b'Rosh Hashanah hamakom roi lisaser aftuma b'Rosh Hashanah tzvikotama v'shamtar. So I'll say that's fine. In other words, if you want to make the drasha, and you want to say that. Just like halacha l'maisa, so Sotah, where we don't make safek kivadai or onis karatzon, but yet what? Halacha l'maisa, safek is kivadai. So to sheretz, where we do say onis karatzon, right? We do, so we'll also say safek kivadai, that a safek sheretz, a safek tumas sheretz will be tamei. That's fine, but we have to learn out then the rest, which is just like Sotah only applies b'rishus hayachid, so to the only time that a suffix sheretz will go ahead and make you tamei is in rishus hayachid as well. That's all. We're just trying to build out the drasha. I will take it a step further. Umas sotah davar sheyesh bo das lishal. And I will say, just like sotah, we're dealing with the situation of what I will say. Yesh bo das lishal. Yesh bo das lishal means what? Means that halacha l'maisa, there is the ability to ask a person what happened. There's the ability to ask a person what happened. Af sheretz davar sheyesh bo das lishal. So to the only suffix sheretz, birshus hayachid, that will be deemed tamei is a case of where you have the ability to ask the person what occurred. Now, we'll look at Rashi just a moment. Last Y line in Rashi. So he says, Im nitmes im lav. Shabbos by Sotah, do you have the ability to ask the woman, to ask the man, tell me, did you engage in active immorality? Do you have the ability to ask them? Yeah, it doesn't mean you're going to get a truthful answer, right? But Lamais, you have the ability to ask. Af safik tuma davar sheish bo benogea zed das lishal im naga im lav v'hu omer eni yodea kigon adam otaro shaya adam osak bahem b'shashal safik. So Rabbi says, so the Gemara is going to say like this: just like Sotah, we're dealing with a case of a. So Rabbi say, watch all the criteria, right? In order to become tamei, what does it have to be? It has to be a safik tuma birshus hayachid and yesh bo das lishal. You have the ability to ask the parties involved what happened. So too the Gemara wants to say by sheretz, the halacha is going to be the same. It has to be a suffix tuma where birshus hayachid, and there has to be yesh bo das lishal. It has to be a case where you have the ability to ask the person what happened. So we'll say that's the case of where there's a. So again, if you meet those three criteria, suffix tuma, number one, birshus hayachid, number two, yesh bo das lishal, number three. So we'll say, by the way, what's a case of ein bo das lishal by suffix sheretz birshus hayachid? I'll give you a good example. Let's say that you have a pot, right? And you're not sure, did the sheretz touch the pot or not? So we'll say the pot doesn't have das lishal, right? You can't ask the pot, ultimately, again, what occurred. So that would be an example of a suffix tuma, even though it's b'rishus hayachid, but ein bo das lishal. So I'll say, this is actually a fascinating Gemara, because what you see happening over here is the Gemara is building up a halachic construct, right? And the halachic construct, ultimately, again, is from this connection between Sotah and sheretz. By the way, we're going to see about say in this respect, Sotah is going to serve as a paradigm for hilchos tuma, not just by sheretz. The Gemara says as follows: Mikan amru. Based on this discussion, we say as follows: Davar sheyesh bo das lishal birshus hayachid sveiko tamei. So we'll say the Gemara says from here we emerge with a principle. What's the principle? Anytime I will say let's work backwards a little bit. Anytime you have a suffix tuma, and that suffix tuma is occurring birshus hayachid in a private domain, and it's occurring in a situation of yesh bo das lishal, which just simply put means what? People, not things, right? So I have a suffix tuma birshus hayachid with a yesh bo das lishal with people. Then I will say, what's going to be the halacha? Sveiko tamei. The suffix is tamei. And I will say, by the way, what's the paradigm for this concept? What's the paradigm? Sotah. Because we'll say, what is Sotah? Sotah is a suffix tuma birshus hayachid, right? We're not sure. Did the woman commit adultery? Didn't she commit adultery? Where is this happening? In rishus hayachid, there's yesh bo das lishal. Why? Why is yesh bo das lishal? You could ask them. You could ask the people what? Did you do something? Didn't you do something? And I will say, what does the Torah say? What does the Torah say about that case of suffix tuma? It's tamei. Rabbi Kiva says, how do you know it's tamei? First of all, how do you know that she's tamei? Number one, she can't have relations with her husband. Number two, Rabbi Kiva adds on, what else can she do? She can't eat truma. So Rabbi say, this is incredible. This becomes a paradigm for tuma. So whenever you have a suffix, Rabbi say in general, I have a suffix tuma. What do you do with a suffix tuma? Oh, now I have the criteria. It depends, right? Number one, Rabbi say, what do I have to look at? Location. Location, where did it occur? Where did it occur? So if it occurred in Rosh Hashanah, okay, fine. Number two, right? So that's number one. Location number two. What do I have to ask? Who did it occur to? Or what did it occur to? If we're talking about utensils, in bodas lishal, nothing to talk about. But if it's people, yesh bodas lishal, then it will be tameh. Let's finish out the principle. V'she'in bodas lishal, I will say, if we're talking about a safek tumah that occurred to something that doesn't have the ability, ultimately again, to be asked, so to speak, doesn't have the ability to converse, then bein birshos hayachid, bein birshos harabim, sfeko tahar. Ultimately, again, whether that doubt arises in Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Hashanah, therefore, I will say, it turns out, so I will say, this is really an incredible principle for Hilchos Tumah. So what Sotah establishes for us is a dramatic paradigm, that any Safek Tumah, Bershus Hayachid, with something that Sheyesh Bodas Lishael, ultimately, again, is going to be rendered Tameh. Now, also, what you can extrapolate from that is, Safek Tumah Bershus Harabim, what's going to be the halacha? Tahar, right? Safek Tumah with a davar she'ein bodas lishal, that you can't ask, that you can't converse with. What's going to be the halacha? Tahar. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it's Rosh Hashanah Mishsiyachin. The only case, this is incredible, the only case of Safek Tumah that remains Tameh is Safek Tumah Bershus Hayachid with a davar sheyesh bodas lishal. Where does this principle ultimately emerge from? Sotah. Incredible, I will say. Absolutely incredible. Again, then this becomes the guiding light for Tumah and Tara. I was saying Gans Shas. This is it. This is the guiding light Tumah principle. So let's go back to another line. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Truma, or Mahader Ihu Kahuna. So I will say, so remember again, let's go back for just a moment. Rabbi Akiva introduced this whole discussion. Right? How did Rabbi Akiva introduce the whole discussion? Rabbi Akiva says, Torah says, Nitma'a, Nitma'a, Nitma'a. Why three nitma'as? One, to teach you that the Sotah is asura to her husband. The second, teach you that the Sotah is asura to the adulterer. And the third, that the Sotah is asura to, or truma, right? So Rabbi Shmuel came along and said, remember again, let's just go through the drasha. So Rabbi Shmuel said it's a kavachomer. If a grusha, which is a bas Kohen who married a Yisrael, once she gets divorced from her husband and she doesn't have children, she's allowed to go ahead and eat truma, right? Yet she is asura to the Kohen. She can't marry a Kohen. This Sotah, who is asura to truma, certainly can't marry a Kohen. So that's fine. But the Gemara says, now the Gemara says, I don't understand what's going on over here. He says, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva truma. Rabbi Akiva is talking about truma, umahader leihu kahuna. And why is Rabbi Shmuel responding ultimately again with marrying into the kahuna? Right? In other words, what does Rabbi Shmuel's response have to do with Rabbi Akiva? Let's see, ever have a conversation like this where you're talking about something and someone says something back to you, someone responds something, and you're like, "Are you listening to what I'm saying? I don't even know what you're talking about." Like that has nothing to do with the conversation. This happens to me quite frequently. I'm not sure why. I say, but Lamaisa. So the Gemara is saying Rabbi Akiva is talking about truma consumption, and Rabbi Shmuel responds with marrying into the kahuna. So v'su Rabbi Akiva kahuna minale. So we'll say furthermore, where does Rabbi Akiva learn that ultimately again that the Sotah will be asur to the kahuna? I will say now, you'll think to yourself, what's going to be the case of where the Sotah would be asur to the kahuna? So I'll tell you, this would come up. This would come up in a situation of, imagine Reuven and Rachel, right? So now Rachel's being taken to the Beis HaMikdash to drink the Sotah waters, and Reuven dies on the way. Reuven dies. So obviously, if there's no husband, then what? There's no drinking. Then there's no drinking. So the Maisa, how do we know that in that case, Rachel would be asura to go ahead and marry into the kahuna? So we'll say what we'll do is we'll stop over here for today. Right? I'm going to leave you a little bit on the cliffhanger of Rabbi Akiva. We'll pick up Emiras Hashem with the rest of it with Rabbi Akiva's statement in Emiras Hashem tomorrow. But again, I will say, I just want to point out what a day. It's always an exciting day when you kind of walk away with the Shas principle, especially a Tumantara principle. I'll say, so now I just want to tell you, if anyone ever asks you a Safek Tuma Shaila, you are prepared to paskin on Safek Tuma Shaila. So I'll say, it's actually because it's actually quite simple and straightforward. Everything is measured up by this one principle. If a Safek Tuma, only if it is Birshus HaYachid and Yesh Bo Das Lishal, it's going to be Tameh. Every other case ultimately, again, is going to be tahar. Incredible. All right, well, so stop over here. Share with you a short idea on Yom HaAtzmaut. I'll stop it and start it. Just stop and